ambassador, whom you know has been ambassador for almost 2 years now, and prior to that, and still is, President Obama's chief advisor on Russia policy. And the ambassador has been a great support to AmCham and to American business, and I'm very, very happy that he has been able to come and speak with us today. I'd like to now introduce Ambassador McFaul and ask him to come to the podium.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here again with you all. I have 5 points. I'm a professor by training. It's always good to let my students know how many points and they can write them down. So I have 5 points I want to make with you today. First, the U.S.-Russia relationship is an undervalued stock. In other words, we think it is performing much better than the market, and by the market here I mean public perceptions think. Let me tell you why. Without question, as I agree, the last year has been a difficult one in U.S.-Russian relations. I think of Syria, I think of the Magnitsky Law, I think of the Dima-Yakovlev Law, domestic developments here in Russia, and underlying that is a dangerous trend that we notice sometimes about isolationistic tendencies here in Russia. It's not across the board, it's a very complicated story. That's all happening. But at the same time, the story that doesn't get told, next to all of those difficult issues in U.S.-Russian relations, are what we would argue is continuity in cooperation on what we define for the United States, for the Obama administration, are core national interests of the United States of America. 1, North Korea. 2, Iran. 3, Afghanistan. And 4, trade and investment. I'll say more about that in a minute. These, for us, are not just marginal issues where we're looking to have press conferences or nice things to say when American and Russian officials meet. These are not some of them. They are the most important economic and security interests for our administration right now. And on all of these issues, I could go on. In fact, I will go on for a little bit. On all of these issues, we are continuing to cooperate with Russia in a way that we believe enhances our security and economic interests, and also we would believe, although it's for the Russian government to say so, enhances their security and economic interests as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing so. And I will go on. Counterterrorism. It's been cooperation we've had for a long time. You're now reading about some of the fruits and rewards of that cooperation. The last week, we have had tremendous cooperation, both here in Dagestan and in Boston with our Russian counterparts over what we believe is a common national security interest for both of our countries. And the point I want to make here is for somebody who works on all of these issues every day is continued cooperation on issues where things are moving smoothly does not make page 1 headlines. When's the last time you read in any newspaper about, quote, the continued successful implementation of the New START Treaty? That doesn't get you on page 1. The continued cooperation in space, the continued military-to-military cooperation. None of that gets you on page 1. In other words, continuity in cooperation does not make the news. But from our perspective, if we look at the entire relationship, we are, by and large, very satisfied with the momentum that we had started in 2009 and continued through to today. In fact, at one point, we got so frustrated with this problem of getting our news out that in February, we ran 28 days of good news in U.S.-Russian cooperation on Twitter. If you don't follow us on Twitter, I encourage you to do so, both the embassy and my account, McFaul. You can find me. And we ran 28 days. Every day we ran a story about good cooperation in U.S.-Russian relations to try to get out this message of this continued stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis that doesn't get valued, that doesn't get perceived. So that's number 1. We believe, yes, there are troubles, but overall, this is a relationship that for us is working on some of the most important issues for our administration today. Number 2, After the 2012 election year, which was in many ways somewhat of a distracting year for foreign policy in general for our administration, we are now actively engaging and reinvigorating high-level contacts with the Russian government. Vice President Biden already has met with Foreign Minister Lavrov a couple months ago. Secretary Kerry just completed his third meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov yesterday. We had a very important visit here just last week by the National Security Advisor, Tom Donilon, President Obama's most important foreign policy advisor, where he came here to lay out our vision of U.S.-Russian relations over the next 3.5 years. And a very substantive, big vision, not just the small ball stuff, but the big strategic vision that we see and where we want to be at the end of the Obama administration. This year we will have two very important meetings between our presidents. First in June on the sidelines of the G8 summit, and then most importantly when President Obama comes here in early September. And we anticipate that Secretary Hagel, our new defense minister, Secretary of Defense, given his long-standing interest in U.S.-Russian relations, we see him as another asset who will play an increasingly important role in U.S.-Russian relations in the coming 4 years. Third, the message of this new high-level engagement is a simple one. We want to place this bilateral relationship in its proper strategic context, at least from our perspective, the Obama administration. Russia remains for us an important global actor, whether we're talking about the Security Council, energy markets, nuclear superpower, and the wide range of very important relationships, bilateral relationships that Russia has around the world. On all of these dimensions, Russia remains for us an important strategic actor on almost every issue in international relations. And on the biggest issues of our time, as I've already suggested, we believe that when the United States and Russia are cooperating, we are more likely to realize our national interests than when we are not cooperating. It's just as simple as that. Given all the equities and all the influence Russia has in the world, we think we're better off in cooperation with Russia in seeking to realize these outcomes than not. Now, don't be misled. We'll continue to seek our objectives without Russia, if and when we have to. But we know that we're much better off and much more likely to succeed if we're cooperating with Russia. And most importantly, we continue to see that on most major security and economic interests, there's more overlap than there is confrontation in our bilateral relationship with Russia. What President Obama likes to call win-win outcomes. We continue to seek out and understand win-win outcomes. The only way you can do that is through more engagement, more connectivity between our governments. And we cannot, at a minimum, let issues of disagreement crowd out cooperation on our vital national interests. Fourth, over the next 3.5 years, we're already counting, right? The clock is ticking on our administration. Increasing trade and investment between our two countries is a top priority for President Obama and our administration. The last time President Putin and President Obama met in Los Cabos last summer, interestingly, as we began to talk about issues like Syria and Iran and North Korea, the conversation stopped. And President Putin said, wait a minute, I want to get to all those things. But first, I want to talk about Rosneft and ExxonMobil. And that was a really interesting pivot, because he wanted to signal to Obama, and Obama agreed with him 100%, that when we're talking about U.S.-Russian relations, we have to give more pride of place to the economic dimensions of our relationship. And President Obama has believed this from the beginning, and I remember very vividly sitting in the White House Situation Room as we were discussing telemetry. How many people know what telemetry is? I know you do, Sergey. But good. That's really good. The fact that nobody raised their hand is a good sign for U.S.-Russian relations, because 30 years ago, in U.S.-Soviet relations, telemetry was a key issue in our bilateral relationship. And as somebody was briefing the president on the importance of telemetry for the New START treaty, he said, okay, I got it, I finally understand this. But if we spend the next 8 years, this is in 2009, he already was talking about the next 8 years, just talking about telemetry, we will have failed to change the basic dynamics in U.S.-Russia relationship. So what he talked about then and what our two presidents talked about in Los Cabos is developing a multi-dimensional relationship with Russia, and that includes, first and foremost, increasing the economic dimensions of our bilateral relationship. Now, we want to do that for two reasons. One that's obvious and one that may be less obvious. The obvious reason is this is a no-brainer. If you seek to enhance the prosperity of the American people, Russia today is a tremendous opportunity for us in trade and investment. It's just that simple. Actually, this room I don't need to tell that. Usually I have to explain that to other rooms. This room, you know that because you're doing that. And let me say thank you on behalf of President Obama and our administration for all you're doing in that dimension. It's just obvious that more trade increases jobs, increases prosperity of Americans. American investment here does the same, and we say that unapologetically back home. And likewise, see Russian investment in the United States. I want to say that again because 20 years ago, and most certainly 30 years ago, one would have to be rather nervous to say that as a government official. We seek Russian investment in the United States of America because we think it's good for Russia and we think it's good for the United States of America as well. Now, the second reason, just to be very clear about our motivations, we seek this first and foremost because of what we need to do for our own economy and our own people. But secondly, President Obama believes quite firmly that if we have a greater economic part of our relationship, that will create ballast in the overall bilateral relationship. We see this with other bilateral relationships we have around the world, so that when there are political disagreements, and there will always be political disagreements with big, complicated bilateral relationships like we have with Russia. That's just a statement of fact. But we can help manage them and help keep them in more normal channels if we have a bigger economic relationship going on. It creates ballast in the relationship. And when I compare this to other bilateral relationships, and I agree with Minister Belyakov, the numbers are in the right direction, but compared to other bilateral relationships, of course, they're too small. They need to increase to create that ballast. Fifth, and finally, the obvious paradox of point 4, which is that it is a top priority for my administration, for our administration, to increase trade and investment between Russia and the United States. The paradox is that we actually can do very little about that. Let me contrast it to the conversations we had about missile defense just last week. When it comes to missile defense, I'm not that interested in most of your views. Let me be really blunt. And you're not in the room, and you're not represented at the table in terms of talking about how we should manage or develop this issue with the Russian government. When we talk about trade and investment, let's be honest, what decisions we make as an administration is marginal compared to the decisions that you all have to make on a day-to-day basis, right? And that's the way it should be, by the way. I want to emphasize that because sometimes in some places that I talk in Russia, I hear from people, we need some big economic projects that Putin and Obama can agree to. No. The U.S. government should not be in the business of making investment decisions and having big state projects with other states. We firmly believe that. Our job is to facilitate and help to create the permissive conditions for you to make the decisions that you make based on economic decisions, not political or geopolitical decisions. Having said that, I want to say as a CODA, we're proud of some of the things we've done to help create those permissive conditions. Number one, WTO. We had a fantastic relationship with Minister Belyakov's government in the end game of WTO. I want to applaud their administration. It wasn't easy. It was a hard set of negotiations. People always forget that when you get an outcome, right? It's like, oh, that was easy. What are you going to do for me next? It was actually a very difficult conversation, a very difficult set of negotiations, sometimes with Mr. Shavala, some very heated conversations. But it was always done because we had a concrete objective that we both saw, and we're quite proud that after 18 years of negotiations, we worked with the Russian government to get that done most recently. 2 PNTR in Jackson Van, clouded because of the because of the package, the legislative package that went with that, but let's remember, we also got that done. Third, the new visa regime. You said to us 4 years ago, one of the hardest things about doing business in Russia is the visa regime. We changed it. Fifth, fourth, the bilateral presidential commission. One of the things we noticed when we came to office was how little connectivity there was between our governments. And so we created the BPC to try to increase connectivity between a whole wide range of our governments, including, you'll hear, in the Department of Energy, but across 20 different parts of our administration. And we continue to look for ways to enhance the BPC moving forward. And finally, trade missions. Last year we had successful automotive, energy and efficiency and agricultural trade missions to Russia. In June we'll have a trade mission devoted to innovation in healthcare field. That's 5, that will be our 5th trade mission since 2010. It's just a demonstration of the Obama administration's commitment to help try to facilitate trade and investment between our two countries. And I'm glad Minister Belyakov mentioned it, we've been very committed to strengthening protection and enforcement of intellectual property rights. And because of his work, we finally got this agreement, the IPR action plan, done. And now, because of his good work, they're implemented. This is a radical change from where we were in U.S.-Russia relations just 4 or 5 years ago. We are not disputing either the plan nor its enforcement in the way we did just a few years ago. And more generally, we're looking to you, and I'll end on this, to help us help you. Okay? Tom Donilon brought to, in his meetings, including one of his meetings with President Putin, a vision about how we want to advance this relationship over the next 3.5 years. And part of his message was a commitment to reinvigorate the bilateral presidential commission, especially on the trade and investment side. Both bureaucratically, but also in terms of a substantive work plan that we aim to complete over the next 4 years. One of the things that was really quite effective about our WTO negotiations was that we did have that work plan. We knew exactly what we had to get done, and every so often we met at very high levels to say, have we finished what our 2 presidents committed to? And we had concrete deadlines. Part of the problem right now is we don't have that same work plan. We don't have that same agenda. We're trying to put that together as a way to credibly commit to getting certain things done over the next 4 years. The best way we can do that is for you to tell us what you need us to do. Because at the end of the day, for us to meet our most important, one of our most important foreign policy objectives with Russia, it's the decisions that you make that will decide whether we achieve that objective. So I plead with you, either now or privately with me, to communicate what you think we could be doing to help. Because I want to end with this. The next 4 to 5 months leading up to President Obama's visit here in September, I think are absolutely critical. It will set the tone for our bilateral relationship for the rest of the Obama administration. There's no doubt about it to me. This is it. And we're now in the preparatory work. We know the kind of outcome we want from that trip, and we know the tone that we seek, and we seek your help in trying to make sure that economic dimension of the story, both in the run-up and in the actual visit, is properly identified and it gets the proper attention that we want it to do. So help me help you and help this overall bilateral relationship, because I want to make clear that despite the troubles over adoptions, despite the troubles over the Magnitsky Law, we have a strategic objective that comes from President Obama, that we seek to put in place a normal bilateral relationship with Russia. We're tired of the ups and downs. We want to have a normal relationship with Russia that enhances our economic and security interests and enhances Russia's economic and security interests. And we believe this year, 2013, will be pivotal to try to put us on the proper trajectory over the next 4 years. Thank you very much.